We use so much stuff as a population, just like, let alone on Truman's campus, but like in Kirksville and Missouri and the United States and the whole world, we use so much that recycling is just a great way to take leftover things that we don't use, that we take for granted, and turn them into things that we can reuse.
I made a little haiku, and it goes like this. We must reduce waste. At 7 billion people, recycling is key.
Resources are limited, and so it's better that we not waste the resources that we're given.
A lot of people don't realize the impact that they have on the environment, especially with the different materials that we actually use for a lot of our waste. A lot of what goes into our waste ends up getting locked into different forms. It's like plastics and cardboards, and it's especially hard for those to end up being degraded over time.
Recycling is the last of the three-step process: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Recycling is defined as converting waste into reusable material in order to make something new by reducing the overall use and waste of resources. But where does recycled waste actually go? After we toss used products into a recycling bin, it's easy to forget about what actually becomes of the material. Every 2 weeks, Recycling Collection Day rolls around, and the container is rolled out onto the curb for waste management to collect. After the day's collection route, the trucks return to the city's main recycling plant. Upon their arrival, the collected materials are dumped onto a conveyor belt to be sorted and processed. First, workers manually pull out materials that are clearly not recyclable or fail to meet general recycling regulations. These rejects are taken to the dump with the rest of the garbage, where they stay for the remainder of their lifespan. Paper is usually easily recyclable. It is simply de-inked and cleaned with a number of basic tools. Glass and plastic are generally crushed and melted in order to extract their purest forms. Just how effective is our current recycling process? How much of the recycled material simply ends up in the landfill anyway? How much goes on to be remade and reused?
We need to be in the mentality that resources are limited, space is limited, and this planet is being destroyed. So that's it.
Trees, in the long run, they do help us breathe. They provide oxygen and whatnot for us. And oxygen, it's essential for life. And yeah, anything to help the reduction of deforestation and stuff, I'm on board.
Because the more we recycle, the less product waste we use, and the more we can preserve the earth for future generations.
I think the main reason for me that recycling is important is because of the energy that it saves. And that is in terms of, I guess it depends what you're recycling, but I think that is what recycling is doing, is putting things that have already had energy spent to make them and then remaking them again, but using the energy that's already been expended in a way that that isn't using a whole bunch more, I guess is the whole thing. And that affects a lot of different sectors, not just, I guess, the materials that you're using, but also the people that are working to make those. And so I think especially a lot of the plastics or, different things that we use in the US, it depends, I guess, what company or whatever, but a lot of them are made by people in other countries and labor that I don't think is usually very moral or good to be using. So using as little as of those kind of resources as possible for me is something both important for a human rights perspective, but then also just morally.
That makes no sense. So recycling just makes sense, like if you're looking at like a business side, then economically, like it's better to use something that's already created, because it'll cost a lot less than paying all the workers and having actually decent working conditions for people who are working in mines or things. Like I think that it goes in the dignity of person and dignity of work, as well as like respect for the planet.
So recycling is important because you can take those materials and repurpose them into materials that we can actually end up using again and again and again. While it's not a perfect process, it does help release a lot of the waste that we would end up producing and leaving in those landfills. I think another thing is not a lot of people realize that we do exist in a vacuum. So all the materials that we have available to us have always been available to us, and realistically those are the only materials that will be available to us in our lifetimes.
The students are definitely affecting change not only on campus but in the town of Kirksville itself, and that's really good to see.
The Environmental Affairs Committee Chair, it's part of my responsibility to help promote sustainability and awareness and education on campus, and do some smaller programs such as glass recycling in the dorms and here in the sub. This year we're also doing some programs focusing on education and awareness, mainly through posters and later on a social media campaign. We run Earth Week. We coordinate with different department chairs, different professors in their classes and organizations to bring it all together.
For the most part, today's recycling is largely ineffective, ultimately using an unnecessarily large amount of energy and resources. Therefore, the overall value of recycling does not cover the cost. It is not always economically viable for companies to buy back recycled material, especially prevalent today when oil prices are at an all-time low, and it has proved cheaper to simply make more plastic things rather than convert used products. There is no defined price on the cost of carbon emissions. Countries across the world import recycled materials from the United States, particularly China, which has virtually run out of its own resources to produce with.
With regard to kind of society at large, or the community of people that I tend to interact with, I think it's an ongoing education project. Like here at the university, we're challenged with, I think, educating and re-educating every incoming cohort of students anew as to the relevance of doing that, because they may or may not have experienced it in their growing up years in their family, and to encourage them to do that consistently is definitely an education project. So I think education kind of plays a role. I think that on the scale of what happens to the materials in our culture, I think that by and large we are remarkably complacent about thinking that we're achieving something by recycling, being involved in a recycling program that, say, a city like the city of Kirksville sponsors, because most people don't know what in fact is happening to the materials that they believe they're recycling. So I tend to be wary and skeptical of things on that basis, and like to kind of understand something about what the final fates of materials are, and I actually prefer to simply not generate them. So that means being more comprehensively thoughtful about what I choose to purchase and what I choose to kind of accept into my life way. So the level of thinking that I exert about it at this stage of the game has much more to do with that than it has to do with kind of being conscientious about going through the motions of collecting the materials that I know are readily recyclable, because that goes without saying, and it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction, but doesn't necessarily address the root problem. Okay, so that's where I see it kind of as a personal practice and what I understand about it in context.
I think the incentive is there. I think people just, at this point, they don't see that the world is getting any worse with them in it. I think they're just like, oh, that's something that's going to happen later down the road, so I don't have to worry about it. So I think the incentive is there. Personally, I just don't think people are buying it because they don't see the long-term effects ever affecting them.
If it just like becomes a norm, because I think one thing that a lot of people don't like recycle is just because they don't think about it a lot. Like, I know my parents are terrible at recycling, and like I tell them all the time, but it's just not something that their generation like grew up with.
So I think it's a combination of being aware of where they can recycle, being aware of what they're supposed to recycle, and just taking the time and energy to do it.
The fact that we throw something in a bin and we expect it to be reused, or we expect it to somehow help the environment, but when you think about it, what happens after you throw it into the bin? Does it actually get recycled, or does it just get tossed away?
You don't really see very many, I feel videos or I don't know, just people talking about it very much. I mean, people say recycle, but that's all you really hear, at least for me. And I feel like I've been pretty exposed to a lot of people in a lot of different communities, and I just don't think that I hear about it enough,
So you think if we had presentations on campus, people would come about what recycling is and
maybe
the process?
Or maybe presentations
posters?
on campus, posters, or even just making educational I don't know, a video or something, sharing a link. That's really easy because then you just you don't have to go anywhere.
You can't guarantee that people are going to watch that, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, but they'll probably watch that more than they would go to a presentation, probably.
Okay, so
I don't know.
Do you think social networking would be influential?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been pretty influential, with a lot of other topics. So it would probably help recycling too. Plus, then you don't have to make up posters.
Our product waste will only continue to crowd landfills, which already take valuable, limited space. Eventually, our waste will end up further polluting the air, land, and ocean, harming Earth's living organisms and ecosystems to such a point that the planet is uninhabitable. Google recycle, and the first image that pops up is a triforce of arrows, recognized worldwide as the symbol used to indicate a product is recyclable. All too often, we forget the other two arrows also stand for something, two steps that are more important to remember than recycling. Reducing our consumption and reusing our things are two steps that work to change our consumer behavior. Recycling should be the last step, not the first resort. Material that proves difficult to recycle, such as plastic, is often not recycled. One way to solve this particular dilemma is to demand from companies that they use recycled materials more often.
I think if we did more recycling where you use the whole, more upcycling, I think it's called, where you take a bottle and make something else out of it instead of smashing the bottle and then remaking it.
So in my own life, I think recycling is entirely second nature. And the way I think about it has more to do with preserving the utility of what I have as much or even more than it does trying to understand what I can avoid disposing of. But in my life, since I was about 20, I've continued to think very consistently about how to pare down my waste and then reuse, and if not reuse, recycle everything. So I'm kind of a squirrel in a pack rat. I don't throw things away, I just use them until they're hammered. And I pick stuff up and try to find uses for it, and always feel really gratified when I've had something for 15 years and suddenly I find a use for it.
I think that we should definitely be working on figuring out processes that would make it more efficient. There's a lot of energy that goes into actually recycling things. And then also there's a lot of materials that we currently use that cannot be recycled. So either we need to stop using those materials, or we need to figure out processes that don't take too much energy, which will create something that's useful out of that.
Kirksville is going to be very different than like Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago. So just like keeping things kind of local, and then I guess has a trickle down effect into like you don't need as much gas, less fewer emissions and stuff like that.
I think one way to make it better for Kirksville alone is just to have more options with what we can recycle. I live in Columbia, Missouri, and you can recycle up to like 6 or 7 plastics and glass and all crazy sorts of stuff.
Maybe like giving out a reward for recycling or something along that line, so that like instead of people just saying, oh, you can recycle, there's like something that they get back from recycling that they actually see, because a lot of people like don't look at what they are getting in return because it's not like right there as a reward.
We use so many things that are disposable instead of taking the time to wash a water bottle or wash dishes. So I think a cultural change is necessary, and that can be helped through legislative processes. I know that in the state of California, they've just outlawed plastic bags for grocery shopping, and even though it may be more inconvenient to take reusable bags and make sure you always have them with you when you go to the grocery store or other places, it does so much good for the environment, and so I think government can help in that way.
Or maybe having like restrictions on what companies can make packaging out of to make it more recyclable friendly, because again, like it just doesn't make sense just to create something that's just going to get thrown away. So yeah, I think if it becomes like a norm, like it has with our generation, then it'll be more just like the thing that you do. You know, like people used to just compost all the time because that's what you did, and now we just throw away everything because we don't have to think about it. But I think it's becoming more known now that we live on a finite planet and that we can't just keep going like this. And so recycling has become, I think, more of an issue that people think about, and something that people will hopefully take seriously. Like if we're gonna keep buying things, like we need to know how to dispose of them properly.
So that's something that I think is pretty difficult because it's been around forever, and if you don't know that you should recycle, then I don't know where you've been. But I think that just making it obvious to people how easy it is to recycle, and how, like, so there's a recycling bin and a trash can next to each other. People still throw recyclable stuff in the trash. Why is that? I think that not putting that trash can there or making the recycling bin 24 times bigger than the trash can might help, maybe. There's an idea.
You could be the difference in implementing something to make your community better, as well as impacting an entire worldview of recycling and creating a social movement that really helps us restore our resources the best that we can.
It is important that we as consumers take responsibility and become informed on the recycling process and its rules. While it's easier to remain ignorant when the consequences of our waste are not staring us in the face, it is clear that the human population's awareness on this issue is key to preventing a future disaster. As the EPA website states, recycling has environmental benefits at every stage in the life cycle of a consumer product, from the raw material with which it's made to its final method of disposal. In short, our waste journey and destination post-trash can is important and will affect us now and in the future. So the question remains, why not reduce, reuse, and recycle?